Okay, so today, hey, we have a blind ambition with Jack Kelly, and our special guest star today is Aaron Terrazas. He is the former Chief Economics Officer at Glassdoor and at Zillow and Convoy, and worked at the Treasury. So this man knows what's really going on, and I think for the audience here, I think for us anywhere, people want to know what the hell is going on with the economy, what's going on with the job market, what's going to happen in 2025. So Aaron is an expert in what's happening. So I'll put it to you, Aaron, and maybe you can share like what is happening currently, in the economy and the job market.
Thanks for that introduction, Jack. It's great to be here. Always fun to join you. I'm blushing for those of you who are watching by the introduction. But no, I mean it's a weird time in the economy. I think kind of 2024, we're almost at the end of it, has been, headline data have, been okay, but it feels like there's just really different undercurrents beneath the surface of those headline numbers. I remember one of my early career mentors telling me this phrase that aggregates hide more stories than they tell. And I think we're really experiencing that. On the one hand, the official data look okay. On the other hand, a lot of people are feeling turmoil, anxiety, kind of insecurity in their jobs, kind of with the aftermath of inflation. Not everyone, but some people are. And I think, again, that's that disconnect that a lot of people are feeling right now between what the headline numbers say and what they're feeling in their gut.
No, no, help me out to explain. When you say the headline numbers are what people feel in the gut, is it because is it the economy is doing okay, but people feeling it's not okay because when they go to the supermarket, they're paying more? Is that sort of what you mean?
That's certainly part of it, kind of this
Yeah.
this long echo of inflation. Of course, inflation has come down a lot
Hmm.
over the past year, but kind of the price level is still high, and so people are still saying, why am I paying more for eggs or milk or rent than I was a year ago? It hasn't come down, and my income hasn't caught up nearly as much with that. But I think there's something more. It's not just the price level. I think we talked about kind of you and I have talked about before, kind of these very two different job markets that are happening.
Right.
There's kind of the job market for people who have vocational trade skills, frontline service workers. It still feels like that market is very tight. Anyone who owns or manages a restaurant knows that it's still very hard to find food service workers. At the other end of the skill spectrum, people who have kind of tech skills, kind of finance to some degree, professional services. It just feels like the labor market there is a lot softer. And it's not just layoffs that we see a lot of headlines about. It's not just RTO, which there are also a lot of headlines about. I think there's a fundamental erosion in the quality of work over the past year. Think about how economists measure inflation for chips. We control if there's fewer chips in the bag. That's called quality controls. We don't do that for the quality of jobs. And it just feels like for a lot of people, particularly white collar workers, particularly in tech, there's been this job quality erosion over the past year that's not being accounted for in a lot of our metrics.
I haven't heard this before, so let me understand it. So when you say quality erosion, does that mean the jobs pay less, or does that mean you don't have enough responsibilities, or a little bit of both?
It's precisely that they don't pay less. They're paying the same, but people
Right.
feel like they're working more. They're more stressed. They have fewer resources. Their teams are overextended. They feel less secure about their job security.
Hmm.
So again, a lot of these jobs where people used to have that sense of security, sense of being fully resourced, suddenly over the past year, for the first time in a very long time, that seems to have gone away.
I see this all the time on the blind platform. I don't know if you delve into it every once in a while, but it's really wild because you get these folks who are, let's say, mid-20s to mid-30s, and they're making, no exaggeration, two, three, four, five,
A
six,
lot of
eight
money.
hundred thousand dollars
Yeah.
stocks and RSUs and everything, but yet they're still miserable. And
Mhm.
and a lot of times I like step back, like, how are you miserable? You're making $500,000 and you're like, 28, you're living the best life, but they're worried, they're scared. Is that to what you mean? Like, even though they're doing well, they're worried. Is it that, Aaron, they're worried because someone's going to pull the rug out under it? Like, hey, I'm doing well now, but I don't really feel that confidence is going to go on forever. Is
That's
that
a big
is
part of it. Yeah,
yeah,
that sense of insecurity, kind of that,
yeah.
they used to feel like a lot of these folks you're talking about, I'm sure, kind of trained or educated to a certain kind of skill set.
Right.
And suddenly that's the reality of it is not living up to the promise that they were, given.
Now, with your economist hat on,
Mhm.
what do you think? Like moving into 2025, are you still going to have this insecurity, or do you think with this new administration and they're still putting people in place and all,
Yeah.
but do you think we're on better times, worse times, same kind of thing?
I feel like the story of the economy for the past year has, really been these two big clouds of uncertainty, kind of interest
Mhm.
rates and the Fed and then the election. And so, we now have clarity on those two big clouds of uncertainty, but there are new clouds of uncertainty. There are just so many kind of moving parts going into 2025. You think of all of the risks around kind of deregulation, potentially an upside for hiring. You think about tax cuts, potentially an upside, but you think about trade and immigration, potentially a downside for hiring. Kind of, there are all of these moving parts. If interest rates stay high because inflation stays high, that's a
Mhm.
downside risk. So, I think the reality is there is still a lot of uncertainty. There's always a lot of uncertainty. Maybe I would say that the balance of risks is toward the upside and improvement of the labor market going into 2025. But that could change. You can't predict human behavior, can't predict politics, and I think those are the big moving parts right now.
But what I like hearing, I don't hear any panic or worry. So it's not as if you're saying, "Oh my gosh, we're going to go into 2025 and it's going to be terrible." So it sounds like, you know, a little bit of everything. And I guess every year you have that. You never know. Nothing's perfect. You're not sure what's going to happen. There's always going to be ups and downs. So it seems like in a layman's terms, non-economy terms, it seems like okayish. Right?
You know,
Is it right? It's not
the
terrible.
economist
It's not the
profession is
best.
not one prone to panic. I think we're prone to think in
Yeah.
trade-offs, not
Yeah.
all good or all bad.
All right,
Yeah,
all right. Can I run by some things that might be third rail type of topics? And I know
sure.
Christine's going to get mad at me because she always worries I'm going to say the wrong thing. Where let's take it with immigration. You have illegal immigration where people are just coming over, and then you have people
Yeah.
come in, whatever. Is it good or bad for the economy to have, a cheaper labor force for jobs that Americans tend not to want to do?
Yeah. I spent early part of my career focusing a lot on immigration, something I've thought a lot about
Hmm.
for a decade and a half. And I think it's hard to put a single word or single characterization on it.
Right.
It's a mixed bag. And we have to realize not all immigration is the same. I think the most clear way to characterize it is it adds to labor supply. That is a subsidy to kind of anyone who consumes those services. It is kind of a tax on anyone who competes with those services. And so,
Hmm.
when we think about the types of immigration we have in the United States, it's not all the same. As I said, we have a very highly regulated system for high skilled workers and a completely unregulated system for low skilled workers. What that means is that kind of workers who compete with those highly skilled workers are a little bit more protected. It's a little bit more of a balanced system, whereas the other end of the skill spectrum, kind of it's really kind of whatever goes. And so I think kind of the important takeaway there is we need to be a little bit more nuanced when we talk about immigration, about where the labor market needs are in our economy. They're across the skill spectrum. It's both software engineers and childcare and home construction and lawn care, and doctors and nurses. But we also have to be cognizant that yes, to some degree there is some competition. It adds labor supply. There's some competition with local workers. That's not all bad. That
Hmm.
helps incentivize kind of domestic production. That means kind of workers can add more. Kind of domestic workers can kind of do more skill types of work. So again, I think kind of some of the broad-based characterizations as all good or all bad probably
Hmm.
misses a lot of important nuance that it both creates opportunities and creates competition. It's good for some people, not good for others, and we need to take a more balanced approach across the labor market when it comes to immigration.
And I guess it would be, for instance, let's say for restaurants that always need a steady flow of
Yeah.
people to come in there. And a lot of times, let's be frank, if let's say an area that I live in Westfield, the parents don't want their kids to be dishwashers and what have you. They want them
Mhm.
to do, be a software engineer or a
Yep.
lawyer. So you don't have the people doing it. So if you do have a flow of people, that's good. It helps because if you don't have it, the restaurants are in trouble and whatever is in trouble. So is that what you mean? That's like where the balance comes in, right?
Exactly. I think kind of a good kind of very concrete example in the restaurant industry is, if kind of restaurants can't hire immigrant workers, it's
Hmm.
not like, they'll probably increase wages a little bit, but they're not going to find the full pool of domestic labor that they need. They'll probably turn to more things like automated ordering or automated checkout, or they're just going to have fewer hours. And so anyone who's been frustrated because their favorite restaurant decided to shut down 3 days a week, as
Hmm.
opposed to just on 2 days a week. That's potentially because of labor availability. And so with fewer workers in those spaces, just get used to some services not being available when you want them. I was talking to another kind of CEO of a manufacturing that does kind of medical device manufacturing, that relies to some degree on kind of immigrant workers. And his response was like, if we can't hire the people that we need here, we just won't do it. It's not like wages will increase. It's just output will decrease.
Mm.
So again, kind of mixed bag trade-offs, not good or bad trade-offs.
See, like I like what you're saying because when, let's say, you look at the news, you'll find like just two versions of reality. Like it's this way, this is what's going to happen. You're giving more of a nuance, and this is why I'm really happy that you're talking about this because it isn't just black and white. There's a lot of nuances, a lot of gray, a lot of it's not as simple, and people just love, especially the news, right? They'll just like, or if you're on one side or the other side politically, it's just yes, no. But from what you're saying, no, there's just more to it.
I have to empathize kind of with like professional kind of media and journalists because they do a very
Mhm.
important job. I think kind of it's hard to distill complicated
Yeah,
topics into a 60-minute or sorry, 60-second or 90-second segment.
yeah.
And that, is going to attract people's attention. So, they have a job, they have a job to do. And so you have to respect that, but it is a constraint.
Now, how about with white collar versus blue collar? I've been
Mhm.
seeing a lot of stuff where, and writing a lot about where blue collar people are doing pretty damn well. White collar, So what do you see for those two groups?
Yeah, I think this bimodal labor market has very much been the
Mm.
story of the past year. And I think it's kind of worrisome. It's anxiety inducing for a lot of kind of white collar folks. I think kind of this is the function of both labor supply and labor availability in the United States, kind of as the baby boomers really completely exit the labor force. You think about the median baby boomer is now 70 years old. The median or so the oldest Gen X is now retiring. It's like kind of in their early 60s, 60, 61. So, all the baby boomer kind of workforce is really almost entirely passed through the labor market at this point. And so it's, this divide between white collar and blue collar workers is partially the result of labor supply, but it's also partially a result of labor demand. You think of forces like kind of corporate cost cutting or generative AI. That's eroding kind of demand for some of these white collar workers. And I think that's a new trend. We have to be cognizant that it's the reverse of the trend we've seen for 30, 35 years at this point. So, in some ways, I often say that it feels like we're already almost midway through the 2020s at this point, but it feels like the 2020s are shaping up to be the anti-2000s. The 2000s white collar workers were booming and kind of very much in demand, and blue collar workers were struggling. And so in some ways, it feels right
Mhm.
now it's the inverse of that.
In a way, would you, let's say, you know, hypothetically, if you
Mhm.
had young kids, would you start thinking instead of paying like time they go to college is going to be like $1 billion a year, you know? So would you maybe say, hey, maybe you should look into HVAC or welding or what have you, and then maybe you start with one welding truck, and then maybe you get a fleet of them. Are you better? Like, what do you think moving forward is the whole, idea of like, you got to go to college, which has been happening for the last decade or so. You have to go. And if you don't go to college, especially in certain areas you look down
Yeah.
upon, and then maybe is it changing where perhaps the blue collar jobs are getting, especially ones who have like unions and pensions. Maybe is that the way to go?
I think people's decisions about education, investment, and kind of what the parents want for them, what they want, doesn't happen in a vacuum.
Mhm.
It happens in the context of the opportunities that they think are going to be available to them once they make that investment. And so, the reality is for much of the past 3 decades, it was a good bet,
Mhm.
to go to college because kind of wages were growing there, demand was growing there. That's where the long-term opportunities were. So, I think people were right, in the 1980s and 1990s, and basically every decade since the 1950s,
Mhm.
um, to invest in higher education. But again, going back to what we were saying right now, you think about labor supply trends, you think about kind of labor demand trends. That that investment calculus is shifting in the economy right now. So I think in some ways, it's not as clear a sure bet to go to college as it was 20 years ago. If you think about your lifetime earnings over the next 40 years, that was a good bet in 1990. It's not necessarily the same equally good bet today. And so that may free people to make the decisions that kind of appeal and interest them, and their passions, pursue their passions. Not everyone, kind of has to do the same thing. Our economy needs people of different types of skills. As I said, I'm an economist. I did a lot of study for that.
Mhm.
As much as I try to do drywall patchwork in my house, that always ends up in a disaster, and I need people
Same
who
here,
know
by
how
the
to do
way.
that. Yeah. So
All right, can I go back to the boomers and the
yeah,
Gen Xers? Because that blew my mind. Because I've read, heard about it, but then just for some reason when you brought it up, it just hit home. So in terms of the baby boomers leaving, and when you
yeah.
say leaving, I mean like mass exodus leaving, like, and what does that mean for everybody else? Is that good, bad, indifferent?
Yeah, I mean, anyone who's been watching the economy, thinking about the labor market, thinking about demographics, we've
Hmm.
been talking about baby boomers really for 50 years at this point. They've dominated the American narrative for, a long time.
So we got to
But
get rid of him, is what you're saying,
no, I
right?
mean, we've been talking
They're too
about
annoying. Like get them out of the way. Is
we've
that?
we've been talking about, oh no, what's going to happen when they actually go for
Yeah,
a long time, and
right.
it's here, they're gone. Like,
Well, wait. When you say gone, do you literally mean like the vast,
no.
not every single one, but like the vast majority?
The median baby boomers retired. Something like
Wow.
60% of baby boomers have exited the labor force. Some of them, may dip their toes back in if they need
How many
to.
people is that about? Like, do you
I don't have the exact number off the top of my head, but
millions?
uh, certainly, millions, tens of millions, in that order of magnitude. But yeah, like I said, the median baby boomer is 70 years old, turning 71 in 2025. The youngest boomers are, approaching 62, 63. And they are on their way out of the labor force. Many of them have left already. Some of them will return, as part-time jobs or occasional work if they need to supplement their retirement income. In general, they're a generation that has saved a lot for retirement. But the story of baby boomers is, the story of baby boomers in the jobs market is now over in my mind.
What are the takeaways though? Like one thing I'm thinking of moving forward, let's say you're Gen X or you're a millennial, and given that the baby boomers are retiring and tapping out, and it sounds like people are living longer,
Yep.
do you think jobs who are going to help service that cohort that's not in the labor force anymore,
Yeah.
or let's say they didn't work in a corporate setting, but they have a business, but they just want to retire, they're selling it out,
Yep.
so maybe a younger person buying it out, does that create a whole new like cycle of
Sure. I mean,
change?
there's a whole kind of segment and cottage industry of businesses that are, two components of what you're saying: catering
Mm.
to baby boomers in, the last quarter of their lives, or quarter to fifth of their lives, and also kind of, the transition of their jobs to younger workers, kind of who will, will fill their spots. Um, you think about the most obvious cases is healthcare, kind of elder care needs. We've known for a long time that that's a booming part of our economy and is going to continue booming. But there are other kind of adjacent. We've leisure and hospitality has remained very strong over
Mhm.
the past 2 years. It looks like in some of the consumer spending data that is being driven by baby boomers, again, who are in their late 60s, early 70s. They're still mobile, still able to go out and have fun, and are spending money, enjoying their last decade and a half of mobility and kind of the ability to go out and drive at night and all that good stuff.
So this is interesting. So when you talk about like the consumer, because you always hear about, hey, the consumer keeps spending.
Yeah.
And it's really wild, no matter like what the news is, right? The news would be really bad. And
Yeah.
I do, all right, you'll be proud of me because I do put
Mhm.
on my economist hat every once in a while.
Cool.
Because
Yeah.
what I do, when you hear like all this negative stuff goes on, I like going to a mall and
Yeah.
looking around to see, are people actually buying? Do they, instead of just walking around, do they have the bags and going there?
Mhm.
And, are they buying stuff to see if it happens? And it just seems to me, I did this over like after like 9/11. I was looking around and the restaurants were all full, financial
Mhm.
crisis, all full. So it seems like the consumer, and now even with the baby boomers, they're retiring, they're still like, as you're saying, they're going out, they're spending, they're eating out. Is that what keeps everything afloat? That we just like to go out and spend money
Yeah.
and is that really the secret sauce to American, just buying stuff?
Yeah,
Is that how it works?
there's the chief economist of UBS, the
Yeah.
Swiss investment bank. He has a great phrase that never short the hedonism of the American consumer. So there's certainly the sense that the American consumer kind of keeps going and going and going. But I think it's something more than just Americans being consumerist and
Mhm,
shopping a lot. I think that with all of the economic shocks over the past decade, from the financial crisis to 9/11, to
mhm,
the pandemic, to come to the trade shocks in the first Trump administration. I think in some ways Americans have become a little bit immune to the influence of economic headlines in their lives. I think kind of they, particularly as baby boomers approach the end of their lives, they're just with this mindset that like, I've got to live my life. I'm going to do what I want, regardless of what is happening in the world.
alright. This might sound weird, but,
Yeah.
like, I don't know, I've seen these threads
Mhm.
on social media where you'll have like younger millennials and
Mhm.
they'll say, hey, we're working really hard, we did everything we were supposed to do,
Mhm.
and you know but we still can't afford the house, we can't afford this, but my parents aren't going to give us any money, and this is not fair. And then you
Mhm.
have some people who'll say, well, too bad, suck it up. Others will say, well, give the money now instead of waiting for you to, parents to die and then give you
Mhm.
the money.
Yeah.
And is that a thing too? Like where this is going on as well, where you have the millennials, let's say, struggling, but the boomers still have the purse strings and not giving it. Is there going to be a windfall going down to the millennials, or no? They're just going to keep it.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a kind of personal decision. I think different
Yeah,
families have different philosophies around
yeah.
kind of consumption for themselves versus kind of passing that on as intergenerational kind of wealth transfers. A lot of people do talk about that transfer of housing wealth, particularly between generations, and that's happening. But I think you know that's again not something anyone should be betting kind of their lives on. There's a reason housing costs
Mhm,
are high. It's because we've had this very kind of um, long-term growth, populate acceleration and population growth, that has not yet begun to turn a corner. And housing supply eventually will catch up, but it has not yet caught up. Again, going back to this question of baby boomers, people tend to stay in their houses until their mid 80s. That's the
mhm.
typical age when people are able to live autonomously. I don't expect the baby boomers to downsize until they hit that threshold, still a half decade off for that median baby boomer, and potentially even longer. So that transfer is, um, people who are hoping for that transfer, intergenerational transfer, well, they're going to be waiting, the majority of their lives for it. It's like a little bit like Prince Charles kind of waiting for most of his life to get the job. So yeah.
To circle back when we start talking about like white collar, blue collar, let's take for the white collar. Is that helpful in a way if the boomers and then the older Gen X's start leaving? Does that open up the doors for more opportunities?
Yeah, potentially kind of it increases kind of opportunities for upper mobility, but they're not necessarily the same skill sets. And so, it
Mhm.
seems like at least at the moment, kind of managerial advancement is going to Gen X, kind of perhaps some older millennials. And so, the youngest cohorts are still, kind of working their way up, gaining experience, and that's going to be a long time coming. In some ways, I think because boomers advanced very quickly in
Mhm.
their careers because of the times and the growth in the economy and the small generations before them. Kind of millennials and Gen Z probably should expect to advance a little bit more slowly in their careers.
Can I ask you one last question? In terms of um, what's happening with inflation and prices going up and all that kind of stuff, do people have to worry about it, or do you think it's all gonna, and the trillions of like multi-trillions of dollars in debt? I mean, is that something to keep you up at night, or somehow it's just gonna work itself out?
You're asking about inflation specifically or about debt?
But I guess both sides of it,
Yeah,
the inflation where, what we talked about a little bit before, going to the supermarket and looking
yeah,
at, the receipt, and you're like, oh my gosh, how like it's $200 or $300, and I really get much. But
yeah.
then also with the US having crazy amount of debts, is this something on both sides we have to worry about, or somehow we'll figure it out?
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about those kind of independently to start. There is a
Yeah.
link there, but inflation, was 9% a year ago or a year
Hmm.
and a half ago. It's now down to 2.5%. That is just extraordinary progress on slowing price growth. I think the not much keeps me up at night. I sleep pretty well, but something that to think about is kind of where does it end?
Hmm.
There was a decade from 2011 to 2019 when the inflation target was 2%, but inflation really ran about 1.3 to 1.6%. So we undershot the inflation target for about a decade economy wide. It's possible that we could have a decade when inflation runs, half percentage point above that 2% target. That's basically where we are right now. And I think as you and I have talked about in the past, I think there are a lot of reasons to put some credence in that idea
Hmm.
that inflation might be a tad hot over the next few years. You think about things like supply chain nearshoring and reshoring, with potentially with tariffs, kind of with broader supply chain de-risking. You think about things like slower immigration, which we talked about a moment ago. You think about things like commodity disruptions when it comes to climate change, droughts and floods and
Hmm.
hurricanes and all those things that kind of impact agricultural growing seasons or mining operations. Think about the destruction associated with natural disasters and hurricanes and insurance costs. All of that, is like a little bit of an upward pressure on inflation. I'm not sure it pushes us up to 9%, but it easily pushes us up to 2.5, 3%. And if inflation is high, that means our debt problems, are a little bit more worrisome, just because with each point of higher inflation, that's a higher kind of neutral interest rate. That means kind of federal government is paying more in interest expenses. And so I'm sure anyone who listens to you or watches you, has no surprise to them that interest rates, kind of long-term interest rates, have shot up over the past couple of weeks, with this expectation that federal debt is going to
Hmm.
increase over the next few years. And even as the Fed has cut short-term interest rates, long-term interest rates have remained high. And I think that in part reflects this fear of higher inflation. It also probably reflects kind of some concern about what's going to happen to the deficit and borrowing with potential tax cuts.
But judging by, you know, your conversation, sounds like you're not worried. You feel somehow these things will kind of work itself out somehow, some way over the course of time.
Um,
Hopefully, sort of, maybe, hopefully.
I think it's we just don't know at this point. And
Yeah.
so I think it's something to pay attention to. I'm not sure I'm worried and stressed about it because I'm not sure there's
Yeah.
not much we can do at this point. But yeah, it's something you have to pay attention to. I think if interest rates kind of stay high, inflation stays high, that changes kind of investment allocation decisions at companies, capital investment. I think it's pretty clear to anyone who's in a white collar kind of tech industry that higher interest rates have changed the calculus for startup funding, for growth at a lot of kind of high risk businesses. And that's the purpose of it. That's kind of the intent. But if it stays higher, that means we're not going back to 2021 anytime for the foreseeable future.
I love this conversation because in addition to just the theme we're talking about, there's a lot of takeaways too for people, who could watch this a few times. For instance, in what you're just talking about, I'm thinking, because I've seen like Paul Tudor Jones and Stanley Druckenmiller all saying that, yeah, it's going to be higher inflation and higher rates for a longer period of time that people are expecting. So you should put money into gold, you should put money into maybe Bitcoins, you should put money into, the stock market and so on to keep up with inflation or maybe even go a tad beyond it. So in a way, from this conversation, a lot of people could take takeaways what to do. Same thing with people who are the boomers and coming out of the market. What are the opportunities, in terms of a job, in terms of a career, in terms of buying out a business? So from this conversation, people could glean a whole lot of different things from it. If they, from what you're talking about, right? Like you could kind of, because for me, with the inflation, yeah, gold, Bitcoin, real estate, other things that could keep up with inflation
Yeah, I
is
mean, I
something
think
to do. It's
my
actionable
my
advice, really, in a
well,
way.
my mantra has always been
Yeah.
leave investment advice to the investment professionals. Economists
Mhm.
aren't investment professionals. We think about risk and scenarios, kind of not specific financial advice. But there are a lot of folks who do
Yeah.
think about that. So.
Now, is there anything that I didn't ask you about that you would love to share that you say, "Oh my gosh, Jack, you didn't bring this up. This is so important," or just something about what you're doing now that you just want to share
Yeah,
with the
no,
audience?
I mean, I think kind of we talked a little bit about the federal debt. I
Mhm.
think kind of another area that often gets overlooked is state and local kind of debt.
Mm.
I think with the end of a lot of the pandemic and post-pandemic spending, I think a lot of states and municipalities are going to kind of run into kind of harder spending decisions, and I think those spending decisions are a lot more rigid at the state and county and city level. They have more direct impact. So, I wouldn't be surprised if over the next year we're talking about things like local education budgets and shutting of schools or laying off teachers, or funding for county infrastructure or city projects. I think that's something that I is on my radar for the next year. Kind of another thing, kind of that I know kind of is a real passion of mine is thinking
Mhm.
about climate change and how climate change is changing the economy. We talked a little bit about it when it comes to insurance and home insurance, but we've seen kind of the massive destruction after hurricanes in North Carolina and Georgia. That's going to mean people need to buy washing machines and dishwashers,
Yeah,
cars
and
more
the
often,
insurance so up, right? Like
and
insurance for
everyone's
those
feeling the
things.
insurance
Yeah.
costs. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So it also changes kind of how people recreate. No one's really going to Arizona in the summer, anymore, because it's kind of unbearably hot. So when do we take vacations? Where do we go on vacations? I think that calculus changes as well.
You're blowing my mind because like this wasn't the intent of the podcast, but as we're talking, the more and more I think about it, these are lessons to say like, wait a minute, here are the changes. Things don't stay the same forever, and makes sense to look at these new waves of change and get in
Mhm.
front of it, because if you don't, you could be left behind. If like you're just saying poo-pooing inflation and you're not doing anything to protect it, your worth goes down, right? Because you're not keeping up with inflation eating into a year after year. So it's almost like looking to see these trends and see, all right, how do I benefit from it? How do I, use it to my advantage? Um, which is a really smart way of looking at it, even though that wasn't what we're, the thesis
Not,
of it.
not,
But as I'm thinking, now I'm also thinking about my muni bonds are not going to do so well. So that's kind of a bummer, but it's good to know, like, oh, maybe it's interesting, Aaron, because just the other day I was looking on X, right?
Mhm.
And, everyone is so dramatic on X. So they're like, and it had something like, I don't want to tell you, but you don't want to know what's going on in the states and cities in terms of their budget,
Interesting.
their finances. Like, in very ominous terms. And it's one of those things you look at it, you don't think about it. And, I saw it like, whatever. And then when you brought it up, I'm like, oh, damn, this is something else I got to think about. This is another worry about what's going to happen with municipalities, right? And their finances.
Yeah, and not every municipality is the same. So I feel like, again, one
Yeah.
of my cautions is that, talking in these broad brush strokes is a little bit risky because
Mhm.
some municipalities have the capacity to cut spending easily or raise revenue pretty easily. Others don't, and so take the trends, look at your specific circumstances, and only you can decide kind of where does the trend apply or not apply to your specific circumstances, your specific risk tolerance, and needs. And so I think that's part of the challenge with any type of financial, medical, legal
Mhm.
advice, is that we're all unique people.
All right. So have they tapped you for the new administration yet, Aaron? They're still filling. What do you think? Chief
I haven't I
economist
haven't I haven't
is
gotten
that
I
it? Is
haven't
that a
gotten a
role?
call. I haven't gotten a call yet.
Is there a
So
chief economist?
I think in the government there are a bunch of chief economists.
Yeah,
Like a lot of departments have a chief economist.
yeah.
There's like I'm not sure, like in kind of the White House, there's several economists. Government tends to be a big employer of economists, for better
Hey,
and worse.
before we had any cool projects, initiatives you're working on? I know climate change is important to you.
Yeah,
Anything you'd like to share with the audience that you're really
yeah.
passionate about?
Kind of as you said in your intro, kind of I've
Mm,
spent the past decade
mhm.
in the tech sector, a number of companies, Zillow, and real estate, kind of Convoy, for those folks who are familiar with it, was like a trucking unicorn startup, kind of a Glassdoor the past few years, and I'm taking some time now to just think about what I'm really passionate about, kind of the types of independent work that I want to do. Some of the things are, as we mentioned, climate change, but also
Mhm.
how can, private data really supplement our understanding of what's happening in the economy? We talked about how the high level government statistics, are maybe missing some important nuance. I think kind of using real time, real world data that businesses collect to understand a little bit in greater detail what is actually happening and get a clearer story. That's something that I care a lot about.
That's fantastic. So I really appreciate you taking the time,
Yeah.
and this is really helpful. I mean,
Yeah.
I think this is even more nuanced and more layered than I thought it would be, which is great because I think if it, like you can see my reaction talking to me, like every time you bring something up, like I didn't think of this. Now I got to start thinking, is this good? Is this bad? How can I pivot? Now I got to worry about like municipal bonds and whatever. And are they
Don't
going to raise
worry.
my property
Don't
taxes?
worry.
I
Yeah.
worry too. That's my thing. I can't help it. You're much more chill than I am. I'm always like, I'm always a little worried. All right, are we staying ahead? Am I staying ahead of it? Am I falling behind? Is there something going to be lurking? I guess you're much more relaxed than me. I
Yeah.
get,
Cool.
but thank you so much. This was
No,
really,
thanks for having
this
me.
was great. And I
Yeah.
think for people who'll be watching this, what we do is we put it on iTunes, we put it on YouTube and Spotify, all that kind of stuff. And I think it's going to be great for people because the way you articulate, you know, your thoughts, it makes it easy to understand it. Because I think what happens with, at least in my experience, when I see a lot of people, economists,
Mhm.
they may be brilliant, but they
Sure.
can't articulate it too well. Like and I'm not calling anyone out. I'm just generalizing. You'll see people post online, and I want to learn, but I just
Yeah.
can't really. Somehow they
You know,
can't translate it, and the way you do it is just so easy. It makes so much sense. And you just you just
that's
break it down and like, oh, I completely understand it. So I think a lot of people are going to appreciate this
y
because you hear economists, you get a little like, oh my God, this is going to be over my head. But they're watching, like, no, this is like straightforward. He's making it super easy to understand.
I joke that sometimes
Yeah.
economists are like medical doctors and that some are, research universities at Harvard Medical Center and know everything there is to know about every, fiber in the heart.
Hmm.
And some of us, like me, are more like small town ER doctors, where we do kind of a lot to stabilize most patients in most circumstances, and
Hmm.
just like have a little bit more of a kind of, patient facing role
Yeah.
than the research folks. So
Yeah. Well, I'm glad. I'm glad you shared the advice and guidance. This is great. And I'll keep you posted when it goes live
Awesome.
and
Please
all that
do.
kind of good stuff. Well,
Yeah,
thank you so much. This is a great
totally.
conversation.
Yeah, always good, Jack. Take care.